Hey, so as you can see, I have finished up all of the sanding on the guitar. I've also masked up and plugged some stuff, so I've masked up the neck as accurately and carefully as I can, and then I've plugged up the holes for the tailpiece and bridge, and then I have hung the entire guitar from the ceiling just so I can reach all parts of it. And now I'm going to begin the priming. I'm going to do 3 coats of the primer, one every 24 hours. I am a bit concerned about the primer getting onto this camera, so I won't film it, but I will give you guys an update as soon as I'm done. I'll come and show you what I've done. So I'll see you in a little bit. Hey there, so just a quick update to show you what the primer is looking like at the moment. So what I have done is 2 coats of primer with a light sanding at 800 grit, and I've done that twice, so paint, sand and paint again, and I will be doing another coat of the primer probably this evening after giving it at least 24 hours to dry before the final sand, and then hopefully move on to the paint. Still a few things, like you can see the wood through some corners there, and on the back as well. It's not perfect, so hopefully the 3rd coat should sort it out, and yeah, then on to the black. Hey, welcome back. So it's the morning after I've finished the last coat of the primer on the body, and it's looking pretty good. I'm pretty happy with it. I'll take a zoom in for you now and show you around, but yeah, just maybe a couple of things that I picked up. So number 1, the documentation, or the sort of best practices on the on the spray paint on the manufacturer's website on nitorlack suggest that once you've sprayed, that you sand it back at 800, and for whatever reason, I'm not too sure why, but the 800 seemed to be quite aggressive, and even though I was spraying, I was able to, just with a very light sand, get back down to bare wood. So after doing 2 coats and like getting back to bare wood pretty quickly, especially on the corners, on the edges, and up here on the edges of the headstock, decided to switch to 1000 grit. Very, very light sanding. Basically all you're trying to do is get it smooth as possible, so that the next coat goes on smooth. And once I moved to 1000 grit, it seemed to be a lot better. Other than that, didn't really have any major issues. I did have 1 or 2 times where I was being a little bit too aggressive on the paint and trying to spray it on too thick, and ended up with a little bit of a drip and needed to sand that back. I still have some sanding to do on this, but what I'm going to do is leave it for, it's been about 24 hours now. I'm going to leave it for maybe another day or 2 before I do any real sanding, just to get it smooth before I do the black. I want to make sure that this is really good and dry before I sand. But for now, I'll show you around and show you what it looks like, and we'll have a look. So here's what the body looks like. As you can see, the color is pretty uniform, and looking pretty good all around. I'm not too worried about some small variations, because it is going to get the black on top, but some of the things that I am super impressed with, at least for my own capabilities, is, sorry, just trying to get the zoom right. If you have a look there, that transition between the body and the neck is looking really nice, and the same on that side, it's looking really good. But all in all, yeah, it's looking pretty good. and I'll probably try and get some better photos once I've sanded it a bit, or some better footage. But all in all, yeah, it's looking really good. I do actually quite like the white, which is interesting, although I think white with the gold pickups can be a little bit, I find it a little bit over the top. It looks quite strong, but I'm still definitely going to paint it the matte black. And yeah, so I'm pretty happy. I'm going to leave it for a day or two now to really dry and cure before I start with the painting. So yeah, we'll see you back in a couple of days. Hey all, so just a brief update. This is the second coat of the black paint. It's starting to look uniform. It's looking pretty good. There are definitely still some areas that need more paint, but yeah, it's looking pretty good, and hoping to let this dry for 2 days, and then I'll come back and do a light sand before I do the third coat. I'm contemplating doing the third and fourth coat. I guess as many coats as I need to get the color absolutely perfect, but yeah, we'll see. Cool, that's it for today. Hey everyone, so welcome back. As you can see, the guitar is looking pretty black except for all the scratches. I just thought I'd do a quick update to show you how it's looking at the moment. So I think at this point I've done 3 coats of the black, sanding it with an 800 between each coat. I'm trying to sand it as flat as I possibly can. What I am finding is that the 800 grit sandpaper is quite aggressive and does seem to leave some weird scratches, which I'm going to attempt to kind of sand out now and just get it a little bit better. But overall, it's looking pretty good. Turn it over and show you. You can see some of those scratches on the back as well. Up on the neck it's looking a lot better, and that's just because I have not sanded it here, but I will do that shortly. But overall looking pretty good. There are a couple of spots where, like you can see there in the corners, where the black sands back pretty quickly, and that's what I was saying about the 800 feeling quite aggressive. And it exposes the white, so I just need to be a little bit careful. But over tomorrow and the next day I'm gonna hopefully do the final 2 or 3 coats of the black, and then a final sand before I start with the top coat, the lacquer. I'm just trying to work out, I'm not too sure yet, but I'll figure it out before I start, if I should leave the final coat of color as is, which will probably look close to something like that, which has a little bit of an orange peel effect, you can see there, which I don't like, or if I should sand it back to, I guess, as high as a 2000 or 3000 grit. I have asked the manufacturer, nitorlack, and I'll let you know what they say, but everything on the web says leave it, the lacquer will smooth that slight orange peel effect off, but yeah, we'll see what it does. And yeah, I'll show you what it looks like after the final coat and sand. Hey, good morning. So it's been a couple of days since I've stood in front of the camera. I've been kind of working behind the scenes on the guitar. Where we are at the moment, as you can see, and I'll give you a bit of a zoomed in shot in a second, but as you can see, the guitar is painted. It's pretty black at the moment. I'll see if I can get some better visuals of it there. But it isn't ready. It's not ready for lacquer just yet. And a decision that I have to make this morning, which I guess you'll see the output of a bit later, is where to go next. So I have done 3 or 4, I actually lost count somewhere along the way, coats of black, sanding it down in between, down to 800. A couple of things that I noticed, and I'm not too sure why. Between each coat I left it for 24 hours at least, but when I came back to sand with an 800 grit before the next coat, I always found that on the corners and on the edges of the guitar, the paint seemed to sand away really quickly back down to that white primer layer, and so eventually made the decision that I would do much lighter sands. So I moved from an 800 to 1000, and also was quite careful sanding over these corners and around the corners and edges of the guitar. So I'm not too sure what that's going to mean for the end result, but it is looking pretty good and it is feeling pretty good. There isn't a huge amount of orange peel, although there is some. The other thing that I did was I reached out to the manufacturer. I do need to make one correction. I think in the first or the second video when I was talking about nitorlack, the product that I was using, I think I mentioned that I thought that they were from the UK, because that's where mine came from. In fact, they're a Spanish company, so apologies to the guys from nitorlack for getting that wrong. But they are a Spanish company, and when I reached out to them directly, they've got a WhatsApp mobile number that you can contact them on, which is really cool. But when I contacted them in English, I didn't get a response. I just used Google Translate and translated my questions to them into Spanish, and they were pretty responsive, and it just meant that I had to do a bit of Google translation, which fortunately is super simple. But I reached out to the guys at nitorlack and I said, hey, should I be sanding this down between each layer? I'm worried that I'm sanding down too much. And he said, yeah, absolutely, you do want to sand it down as much as possible and get it as smooth as possible, particularly before you do the lacquer. So I said, should I sand this down should I leave it raw, or should I sand it down to a 3000 wet sanding? And he said, absolutely, the smoother you can get it before you start the lacquer, the better the end result will be. And that kind of logically makes sense. But I'd seen a couple of different people on the internet talking about the lacquer actually almost melting the paint and will smooth out some of that orange peel effect, and also that you needed something for the lacquer to bind onto, so having an ultra smooth surface is not a good idea. He suggested, yes, absolutely, sand it down as smooth as possible, 3000 grit is fine. So that's what I'm going to do when I get to that stage, and that should be pretty good. Hopefully I don't have any peeling or flaking or things like that, and if we do, we'll deal with that when we get there. The other questions that I asked the guys at nitorlack was, I could not find any tutorials either on their website or anywhere else around how to do matte lacquer or how to work with their matte lacquer product. With all of the lacquer finishes, they're all clear high gloss lacquers, and all of the tutorials are around that, and they talk about putting lacquer on, sanding it at 800, leaving it for at least 24 hours before doing the next coats, and on your last coat leaving it for 2 to 3 months before sanding to 3000, and then using like a buffing compound or car polish compound to get that mirror mirror smooth finish and get that lacquer as glossy as you can. My challenge is I don't want that. I don't want the glossiness, and I wasn't entirely sure. My assumption was you don't want to sand, but I wasn't entirely sure what the end result would be. And so that was the other question I asked them, is how should I do with that? And their response was absolutely sand between each layer of the lacquer that you do. You just don't sand the top layer. So you leave the top layer as, what are they? There was a word for it, out the can. You basically spray it on and leave it, and that's all. So that's what I'm going to be doing. Right now, for today, what I need to make a decision on is, do I spray an additional layer of the black on this before I start sanding? So spray it on now this morning and leave it and start the sanding tomorrow, or should I just go straight into the sanding? That is going to be a bit of a process. I want to do this as properly as I can, so I'm going to be sanding, moving between 1002, 1005, 2000, 2.5 and 3000 to try and get this this finish as smooth as possible before I go into lacquer. Yeah, so I'm going to make that decision. I'm going to have a look around the guitar and just check everything and see if there are any spots that I think need an additional coat, and if there are, I'll probably end up doing another coat. An extra coat can't hurt. It's just thicker paint, and hopefully will just make the guitar a little bit better in the end. So I'm not too worried about doing more coats. I'm more worried about not having enough. And that's it. Other than that, I'll step over to the other side so I can just zoom in a little bit for you guys. Yeah, so maybe what I'll do is I will take this guitar off the hooks up top, and I'll show you guys up close. So you can see there's some scratch marks or some sanding marks. That's from the sanding. I did sand it at 800 and 1000 yesterday evening, and yeah, but overall it's looking pretty good. The sides are looking good. So one other thing that I had yesterday afternoon, or last night rather, which was quite strange, is that previous coats of the black had left the guitar quite a glossy black, sort of a deep black color, as the color on the bottle suggests. But last night, after I'd sprayed it, once it was touch dry, which takes about an hour before it's sort of dry and you can touch it, I looked at it and it was looking more like a gunmetal charcoal grey. It was a deep grey, which I didn't hate, but it definitely wasn't black, and it looked foggy, if that makes any sense. It looked like somebody had poured smoke over it, and that was, wouldn't say concerning, it was just a bit odd. I wasn't expecting that color. It still kind of looks like that today. It's gone a lot more black today, but it did look a little bit more grey than black. And that yesterday afternoon, when I painted that coat and thought this is the last coat, when I came back and found that it was grey, led me to think maybe I need to do another coat and see if I can get that black back. But on reflection and looking at it later on in the evening a second time with my wife, I actually quite liked the grey. It was quite it's just off black. It's not so glossy and high, deep black. It was just a little bit more subtle, and I thought that was quite nice and different and a little bit unique than just a black guitar. But the matte lacquer is going to do that anyway. It's going to dull down that, or at least that's my hope, that it'll dull down that deep glossy black and make it a little bit sort of refract the light a little bit and make it a little bit lighter. So I think I'm going to get on with it, make a decision about deciding whether or not to do another coat, and then probably look at starting sanding tomorrow. Cool, have a good day, and I'll see you on the other side.